This is the Texas Land Guys podcast, hosted by brothers Tim Dosch and Tom Dosch. With their partners David Marshall and Tripp Rich, they have built DMRE, the leading land brokerage in Texas. With decades of experience brokering deals between landowners and real estate developers, they take you inside the deals that move the market.
Today on the podcast, we have a special guest, Jason Baker, who recorded in our Houston office with Tim. It was a great conversation. Actually, we ended up recording for almost 2 hours. And so we're going to be releasing that here in two parts. I'm going to pass it to Tim to give a little bit more background on who Jason is. But this is really going to be a treat for our audience to get to listen to this. So, Tim, why don't you give a little bit of background on Jason?
Yeah, so Jason's been a great friend of ours for going back for decades and just been a big influence and advisor for our business. But to give the audience who may not know him a little bit of a background on him and his bio, he's very well known in Houston. He's, I'd say anybody in the business knows who Jason Baker is and his company Baker Katz. But maybe if you're listening from Dallas or Austin, you may not be as familiar with him. But he's a founder of a retail tenant rep brokerage company called Baker Katz that's been around for over 20 years here in Houston. But they also do acquisitions of retail deals and development of retail deals, and they've done 100 retail developments over the last 15 or 20 years, and have been very successful with that. He's represented some of the most notable retail brands throughout the decades in Houston. Brought a lot of the big names into Houston. He currently works with over 20 restaurants in the Houston area, so he's very dialed in with that business and the successes and failures of that business. And then also, he's worked with 150 national brands. So the really big accounts he's worked for. And we talked a little bit about this on the podcast, but he was one of the early pioneers in the retail tenant rep brokerage, really taking it on exclusively as a business model from a brokerage standpoint. That's had a huge impact on his success on the development side, just understanding what the tenants want and what their needs are. He's also a father of 4 daughters, just an amazing dad, an amazing leader. Tom and I have talked about him. Whatever Jason does, he leads. He's just such a strong personality, but in a really humble way, and a great leader. He has a lot of wisdom. He's someone that we've gone to when we've really needed help, with our business and with advice and what do we do next through some of the difficult cycles. And he's always spoken a lot of wisdom into our business and into the situations that we found ourselves in. And he's also very involved in ministries and nonprofits, all across the world, not just to mention in Houston. So it was a great conversation. The first episode that you're about to hear, we really get into the retail market, the retail business, what's happening in Houston and to some extent across the state, the really active retail developers. We get a lot into the grocery side of the business, a little bit on the restaurant side, the impact of some of the negative news that we're seeing around tariffs and consumer spending. So I think it was a wide-ranging conversation that was very much on the business side. And then we'll have another episode coming out next week that's going to talk more about his personal life, his purpose, his family, his partnership with Kenneth Katz, who's been a partner with for years, and just the way he sees the world and what drives him and what motivates him. So I really enjoyed this conversation. Really encourage you to listen in all the way to the end on both these because I think they're very impactful conversations.
All right. Well, welcome to the podcast. We have a guest today in Houston with Tim, Jason Baker. Jason, great to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we go way back with Jason. Tim, I'll let you kind of kick us off and start off by asking Jason a few questions.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you here, Jason. And there's so much history. We'll get into that probably throughout the podcast, but a lot of personal history and a deep friendship that goes back, I think, over 20 years now. But you've been such an impact on our company and on us, just with great advice through the years. I remember going through COVID and we were like, what do? We need to call Jason Baker. And so we got a lot of good advice during a very difficult time. But I thought a good place maybe to start is just where we stand today currently with, the state of the retail market. There's been a lot going on. I feel like in our business, things started off in the year very aggressive. People were very bullish on the year. And then we got hit with, the tariffs, that kind of rocked things a little bit. It seems like we're in a recession, which is just 2 quarters of negative growth. We've had one, we'll probably have another one this month. So I think there's going to be some negative news, and we've seen some pretty negative articles come out. I know consumer spending, I think, is down. I've heard that in the restaurant business in Houston that we're down 30%, and I'm not sure if that's true or not. I heard that from a restaurant friend that owns a number of restaurants here in Houston, but we don't take a super negative view. I think we're looking at this as there's challenges in the market and there's headwinds. We are huge believers in Texas, long term and even in the short term. But can you give us just kind of a high level? Where do we stand with some of these things? How does it feel out there from a retail standpoint?
Yeah, we had a team meeting yesterday morning. Well, by the way, thank you again for having me. I love you guys and think the world of you and your team. And it's just been a blast to watch you evolve and grow into other markets. And I couldn't be more proud of you guys. And really, more than how proud I am for all the success you've had professionally, I'm just grateful for your friendships personally. Y'all are great people and really important to me. As it relates to retail and the business, it's definitely a funny time. A life coach friend of mine calls this period of time, professionally, calls it like this liminal space. It's a space between where you've been and where you're going, and it feels like that in between space is a little cloudy, maybe less clear than in the past, and probably less clear than it's going to be sooner than you think. That could be months or that could be years. Retail is a funny thing. I mean, at a real high level, retail was slipping, I would say, closer to being out of favor leading up to COVID and the pandemic of spring of 2020. And something really interesting happened, especially with the projects that we own and manage. We saw collections drop down to, in some cases, 25 and 30% that first month or two of COVID. And but there was a real quick recovery and people getting caught up. But more than that, there was a spike in demand coming out of COVID that was very unexpected for everybody that had sort of poo-pooed on the idea that retail was going away forever. And then there was this massive shift in what product type was out of favor, which obviously quickly became office space, and the demand for retail. The good news, I think, and maybe at the time felt like maybe bad news, was that developing retail, as much demand as there was in sort of that year of 2020, 21, and 22, a lot of demand, a lot of tours, a lot of retailers that were looking to expand their current footprint in our market, or retailers that were wanting to come into our market. You mentioned the strength of Texas, and we definitely experienced that, where retailers who had never had a plan to enter our market or into Texas, really were expressing an interest in coming in. But then it became unaffordable to build new retail. And so the blessing in all of it has been, and I would say for the better part of 3 years and maybe longer, has been this writing of, or sort of this correction of, in our market, and I'm talking about Texas specifically, but maybe even Houston more locally, is that we were overbuilt. We had more retail per capita than I think any flagship market in the United States. And it gave our market time to absorb some of the vacancy, some of the space it had not leased. And it really, the equilibrium, it allowed things to balance out. So what that means now for Houston and Texas Texas in particular, is that high level of demand, highest level of occupancy and rents that we've seen since I've been in the business, which is now more than 25 years. And still a really, really high level of interest and not just through investment into the product type, but also through retailers looking to expand here. So I would say for the most part, I think multifamily is on its way back. I think office is, unfortunately, in many cases, like on its way down, continuing to decline. Single family residential is red hot. You can drive into any quadrant of our city right now and see it for yourselves. We had a great conversation with you guys about this just recently that was very helpful for us. But you're going to see more retail added to this market starting in 26 in a very meaningful way, which I think is good.
I was going to ask you too, just about there's been this talk in the last probably 10 years about brick and mortar versus e-commerce. And it's interesting, it's like you're saying, retail benefited from COVID, which was probably surprising, but e-commerce also exploded. And even the difference of not just e-commerce, but so many people now, like Tom was talking about, we deal with these multifamily developers and like, well, where's the closest grocery store? And that's a big issue. What's the drive time? And it's like, well, what if most people are just having everything delivered anyway? And so all the deliveries from restaurants or from grocery stores, I think that kind of convenience has just become a bigger and bigger thing. And maybe COVID helped that as well. People are stuck in their homes and just having everything delivered. So maybe talk about that, just where is brick and mortar versus e-commerce and, kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I heard somebody that I really, one of the things through COVID, by the way, and I think I think this is appropriate to say even in the environment that we're in now, it's never been more important to be careful about what you're listening to. And someone said to me during COVID, they said it's negative people are always right about what they say, but they're rarely right about what they see. And so I think it's really important. I sense you guys do a really good job of this, is like remaining level, not buying into the hype, like filtering through the junk and like being careful about what you're listening to. So pick your people and your sources of information carefully. And so somebody, back to your point, back to your question, Tim, that question about like what has happened, and somebody I really respect a lot, about a year after the sort of the peak of the pandemic, made a comment. He just said, the pandemic has really accelerated, maybe more in retail than in any other class of real estate. It's really accelerated things by like 15 years. So it's not that we wouldn't have ended up where we are today. It's just happened possibly 10 to 15 years sooner. And I think that that's true. I think that retailers have really, I think that most of the retailers, a lot of the bankruptcies that you're seeing right now, companies like Joann's and Big Lots and Party City and others, 99 Cent Only, there's a long list. All of these retailers had issues. Every single one of these retailers had issues going into COVID. And COVID in many ways was a lifeline to many of the names I mentioned and more. And so I think that even some of the doom and gloom commentary around retail right now is not really what's going on. And the good news is, and just to talk about the health of that industry, of this industry and this class of real estate, is that the percentage of vacancy that's hitting the market and the amount of space that's being gobbled up by strong retailers is astounding. I mean, it is a really, really big number. So, but back to Tim, what you're asking, I think there was an acceleration that took place. I think that really good retailers had to make adjustments. I think that they were able to discover that in most cases, especially in the larger formatted junior boxes and wholesale, the bigger operators, the big boxes, I think that many of them realize that we can actually make more money with fewer stores by being smart, like geographically and strategically where we place locations. And I think that those that have emerged are stronger now in many ways than ever. And I think the nature of retail has changed a lot. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going overlooked right now. If you look at what's happening even in the bookstore space right now, and with Barnes & Noble, who people left for dead several years ago, they might be stronger than ever, but they're half the square footage that they were when they were expanding so aggressively in the 90s. So I think it's affected every single category of retail. I think it's affected grocery. I think it's affected consumer electronics. I think it's affected office supply. I think it's affected everything. But I do think that COVID created this opportunity that it really it created this giant leap forward for a lot of retailers. I think the other thing too to be mindful of is that there was, at least pre-COVID, before people really were spending time buying groceries online, they're clearly doing that now more than ever, or even cars online. There was always this asterisk around retail sales that was, hey, overall retail sales are still taking place in and through brick and mortar locations. But it's a little bit misleading because what's not accounted for is auto sales, fuel sales. What are some of the other things like auto fuel? There were a couple of other categories, all of which are now happening online with the exception possibly of fuel. And even though I know you can actually buy some fuel online and, and fill up at the gas station, either way, not to get distracted by that. But now all of that is lumped together when you talk about retail sales. That's a fairly new thing. And the overwhelming majority of retail, like 90% of all retail sales, are still happening in physical stores. So there's been a really good opportunity for real estate to sort of, prove itself that we're emerging from. And the message that we're hearing loud and clear is that omni-channel retail is here to stay. That if you're going to have a strong brick and mortar presence, you need to also have a very strong online presence. Nobody has done this better than Walmart. And then there are others that have been primarily online only. Think of Amazon. And all the experimentation that they've done with physical space, because they know there is a limit to what they can do online without a physical presence. And so they have experimented with and in all sorts of categories of retail. And they are, the tendency, right, is to focus always in the news, is to focus on doom and gloom. And the reality is that they fail quickly, they shut things down, and they pivot. And they are experimenting in all sorts of categories of retail in which they have an interest in expanding. Someone told me recently that they're committed to being the biggest player in paint.
Wow.
The paint sales. So they'll figure it out. But I think that's the message that's emerged about retail with where things stand today.
It's such a great point that there's these market cycles tend to kill off the businesses that are already dead or they're dying. But like you say, maybe it happens way quicker. But then the way that the good companies adapt and change, and maybe radically change their offering and the way they're doing their business, and being willing to fail, trying some things, which I think as a business is super hard, to do that. And then I think it's also a great point on what sources you listen to in the media, because so much of the media is just clickbait. And the more extreme, there's a recent article that came out in Newsweek about how Texas is terrible and it's dying and all this stuff. And it's just clickbait. I mean, there's no actual real data in the article, but the media loves to just take a side. Either it's a super bullish side or it's a super pessimistic side to get people to focus. And so there's so much nuance in these things. Even when these companies fail, maybe it's a success because they're pivoting and they're adapting, and they're going to figure out how to really dial in what they need to do. I want to ask you just specifically about the Houston restaurant market and how you see it today. I heard that kind of one negative snapshot from a restaurant group here in town, but I know you're seeing a much bigger level. You represent 20 different restaurants. Do you see people pulling back with consumer spending, or has it been pretty strong still? Or
it's a great question. What we're seeing across the board, and we represent brands that are publicly traded, and we represent brands with a strong regional presence and have more local or regional credit, but have robust sales. And I would say consistently, the message right now is that our top line sales are really strong, but our profits are being squeezed like they never have been before.
Yeah,
and that is a consistent message. Part of that is impacted by by really rising wages. I feel like that's leveling off a little bit. But then also the cost to construct and to get restaurants open right now is as expensive as it's ever been. And so you combine those things when the inflationary pressures on cost of goods that they're trying to push across on plates. And it's just a really, really hard industry to be in. That model, I would not. The full service restaurant business is maybe the hardest business in the world. And I don't think that people understand that. And I think that when you really look across the entire landscape, I think that there's this misconception that most restaurant operators are just absolutely making money hand over fist. And I just don't think that's really the case. I think that these guys are operating off of much thinner margins than we think. And it's a really, really hard industry to operate within. The good news in, and the silver lining in all of it continues to be that the better operators, the better models, those who continue to evolve are offering us all collectively a better experience. And they're going to be the ones that have the staying power, and that there are some really, really great brands that are outside of Texas right now, desperately wanting to be in Texas. Going back to your comment about the messaging around what's going on in Texas. Look, there's a bumpiness that comes along with any kind of growth. And I think that there's unquestionably, if you look at Arizona, Texas, and Florida, maybe Florida's cooling off a little bit, is that there are a ton of people moving to our great state. And there are a lot of people moving to our great city. And you would expect that there would be some clunkiness with that. But as it relates to the things that are continuing to draw operators, users, residents here, employers, those are all the things to me that feel very positive. I mean, Tom, where you are right now in Dallas-Fort Worth is such a strong market. I think y'all's timing on your getting up there and growing this office I don't know that you guys could have timed it any better.
I think that's right. I mean, one thing that come to mind, Jason, as you guys were talking is the advice you gave us during COVID was, I think you quoted Greg Mott, pastor of Houston's First Baptist. And he said, in the midst of this was April 2020. So this was kind of when we had no idea what was going on, and oil was negative in Houston. So this was kind of doom and gloom, about as bad as I have ever seen our business. And you said, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. And I think the quote was something like, it's normally like 50% as bad, but it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. And there's a tendency to really focus on the negative, and to really, a lot of it's out of fear, but just really be worried about what's going to happen. And I think you also said it's never as good as you think it's going to be either. So it's important to have a balanced view and outlook. And it was around that time that, we decided to open these other offices and move Trip to Austin, move me to Dallas. And our timing couldn't have been better. And that's a good transition to Dallas. I wanted to ask you about grocery stores, because one of the big brokers up here, one of the big retail brokers, said 2025 is the year of the grocer. Mm-hmm. And H-E-B is now, they've taken the gloves off up here, and they're everywhere. Yeah. I mean, their first store was a mile from my house in Frisco, which I was really thankful for, because we're there probably like 3 to 4 times a week getting groceries. But they've opened stores all over. And I'm interested, just since you've worked with H-E-B, you've seen what they've done in Houston. I don't know how Kroger and Tom Thumb and these other grocers are going to be able to compete with them up here. And so I just kind of wonder, I know Kroger's still building stores. They've built some really large stores recently close by new H-E-Bs. Tom Thumb's also still building stores, but we've had so much population growth. There's such a need. There's areas where you have to drive 20, 30 minutes to get to a grocery store, but there's now thousands of homes. And so it's several new Costco's, several new H-E-Bs. But what do you think we'll see in the DFW market in relation to grocery, just with H-E-B coming into the market the way they are? I have to think that that's going to tip the scales in the balance of just groups like Kroger and Tom Thumb doing really well for a long time up here.
Boy, I have a good friend named Doug Munson. He's a grocery consultant. He's spent his entire career evaluating grocery stores in every state in the country. And he told me at one point, he said, I've walked and done evaluations. It was some crazy number. It was like on 40,000 grocery stores around the country. I mean, like, this guy really understands the industry better than anybody I know. And sitting with him is always fascinating to me, just to hear how he evaluates these grocery stores. He has told me repeatedly, he's like, I know that H-E-B is often compared to Publix out of Florida, and that they're almost always kind of joined at the hip in terms of like best in class operators nationally. And he just said, it's not true. There's like H-E-B, and then there's everybody else nationwide.
Wow.
And the worst thing for the Tom Thumbs of the world and the Krogers of the world and the Sprouts of the world and other large and small, United and these other players, was H-E-B getting things figured out in their home market, which is San Antonio and the Rio Grande Valley and places like Houston and San Antonio, Austin, and then obviously Mexico. They have a presence in Mexico. I think their store count right now it's somewhere under 500. The volumes that they do, the way they operate their store, the cleanliness, the logistics, their strategy in real estate, all of it is second to none. And they have developed a culture within that company that they grow people almost always from the inside. We've seen it. And there is something to be said about the way that they have done that. and the way that they have the way they've leveraged their people and the way that they've leveraged their own resources to remain. They are continuing. They're just hungry.
Yeah.
And I mean, hungry, no pun intended, but they are Dallas Fort Worth and this expansion. It is bad news. And frankly, I don't understand exactly why why Kroger would necessarily have their foot on the gas expanding into that market. I mean, either way, we could talk a long time around this, but the great news is that they are very Texas centric. They are very well received very quickly into any new markets that they enter into. They really leverage the Texas theme. Obviously, we know that, but they become a household favorite overnight into any market, any neighborhood, any community that they go into. And I have no reason to think that they're going to be in that 25 to 30 to 35% market share very, very quickly.
Wow.
That is an amazing thing when you think how short a period of time that they've actually have net of Central Market, and they've been up there a long time. They are a force. They are a force. They are not just a grocer; they're a retailer, and they understand everything from lighting to shelving height to music inside the stores to coloring to people and personnel to the cleanliness of their floors. Nobody does it like them. Nobody.
Do you see anyone trying to come back into Houston and compete against them? Because I mean, they've owned Houston now, and I feel like Kroger and the other stores haven't even tried to come in the last maybe 8 years or so, it seems like.
Yeah. I mean, the good news for Kroger, if there is good news for Kroger, is that there are markets around the country that H-E-B isn't in. That's good news for them. The bad news for Kroger is I just see them continuing to lose market share here and in other parts of the state that H-E-B expands into. So yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by that segment of the retail business. I really am, because they too operate off such thin margins. And I've just been more than anything impressed by the fact that H-E-B has been unwilling to rest on their laurels. They are constantly reevaluating the way that they do things. They are very progressive. They are experimenting all the time with new things, and they are just committed to gobbling up more market share than anybody, and that's what they're doing.
One thing I was thinking, Jason, is to kind of affirm what you said, was when the H-E-B opened, there were people like camping out to shop in the store. And like our small group at church, all the girls met there, the day it opened to go to the store. It's like people are that excited about a store that technically wasn't really in our city, but everyone knows about it, and it just blows their minds. We have friends that moved from California. It could not believe H-E-B and just how incredible it is. But I wanted to get your opinion on H-E-B versus Costco from the standpoint of, I haven't actually been in an H-E-B for a while. I'll do the curbside, and that technology and that process is unbelievable. The one by us in Frisco, I don't know how many spots they have. They're so organized. It's so fast. No matter when you get there in the 30-minute window, you're getting your groceries in like a few minutes. Their service is always great. But I always say I wish Costco did curbside, but they don't. But Costco seems to be exploding with growth as well. They keep opening new stores. You'll go to Costco. I went a couple weekends ago to the one in Frisco. I had to park on the grass. The whole parking lot was full, and there were some undeveloped pads, and everyone was parking on the grass. That's how full it was. Yeah. And so I'm interested, just, is Costco going to have to develop, do you think, into that type of a model where they're curbside and delivery? Or because Costco's always been about the experience and getting people to go through the store, and I know they have their own model that's really unique, but they seem to be thriving as well.
They are thriving. If you pay attention to what they have done at the store level, at the company-wide, if you look at what they've done and you study same-store sales, you look at the metrics that most people study when they're looking at that model, the wholesale model, it is stunning what they've done. And I don't think that they compare themselves to Sam's, although there certainly would be some overlap in what they're doing. They are really active and busy in DFW, I can only assume, because they're trying to get ahead of BJ's, who has made it clear that they've got a beat on Dallas-Fort Worth and that they want to expand there. I also think that they don't view themselves necessarily as a competitor to BJ's. There would be some overlap in what they're doing, but I think that they view BJ's more similar to Sam's than they do to themselves. They're a place of discovery. They're a place of, I mean, you think about this in the wholesale model, they're a place of discovery. Like you said, they want people coming in their stores. And they have just the same thing. They have got I would say they're a good one to bring up on the heels of H-E-B, because I know so many people, even in the Pacific Northwest, that work for that company, and to hear them talk about that company, many of whom I know have been with the company for 20, 25, and 30 years, there is a deep affection and respect. And I just feel like when you're in a company that long and you're able to see both front stage and backstage, there's a hard-heartedness that can often come along with that,
Yeah.
And the fact that they are so bullish even on a company like that they've worked with for so long says so much about their culture. So I would, that you should very much expect Costco to see more and more of them opening in Dallas-Fort Worth. And I think you should continue to expect that they are going to continue to focus on market share in their space. But to your point, I mean, you look at what Target's done on the produce and the food side. You look at what Walmart has done. I mean, they are, I think, in terms of, market share and percent of sales, they are the biggest player in terms of grocery nationwide. So, the lines used to be so much more clear in terms of like what each operator was doing, and now there seems to be more overlap now than ever. But Costco, I'm not saying that's my favorite subject, but I'm kind of obsessed with that company. They're very, very impressive at a lot of levels. Yeah.
I watched a documentary like years ago, MSNBC. It was Costco Craze. And it was just about the guy that started it, who's passed away now. But I was blown away by the business model of what Costco's been able to accomplish, and just their mentality, how they test products, how they can offer incredible prices, how they get people in the stores. And it, to me, and I guess in our family, it's always been Costco, H-E-B, Trader Joe's. My parents are from the Northwest and the West Coast. And so Trader Joe's that's one that doesn't seem like it's been embraced, at least from my perspective, the same way up here, just because like they don't have a store by me in Frisco, which kind of blows my mind because that's such an incredible area. So I don't know your take on that. That's another store with a huge following. But it doesn't seem like they've been able to. Maybe it's H-E-B. They just haven't been able to expand and grow.
Yeah, I think what you're touching on is there's not been a category of retail, excuse me, that has been more disrupted than grocery over the last 20 years. And I think that retailers like Trader Joe's, I understand what you're saying. If you look at their sales per square foot compared to an operator like Kroger, as an example, is that Kroger would do something like $500 a foot, and like on average across our city. My guess is that number's declining, but that Trader Joe's, even in our market, would probably be doing more like $2,000 a foot. I mean, so on a per square foot basis, they're doing much better. I think that not unlike other categories of retail, that first to market in Houston, they opened up with 3 or 4 units, and then they just kind of sat still.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried to work out the kinks and to figure out what was and wasn't working in this market. They are just like H-E-B. I would describe them as less of a grocer and more of a great retailer that is passing along savings in some important areas. But I think, Tom, what you're talking about is they are training us how to trade differently. That goes back to the disruption. And so you're never, ever going to Trader Joe's to pick up toilet paper or detergent because that's not what they sell. They are forcing you to come in because they've got some steal on orchids, or because of their whatever the wine deal is that they have.
$2 chuck or whatever.
$2 chuck. Yeah. So they're doing that. And then when they come in, they're going to overwhelm you with a high level of service and comfortableness. I mean, my mother-in-law said to me a week ago, she goes, sometimes I just go into Trader Joe's because I want to be greeted in such a unique and meaningful way. And I go, is that true? And she goes, yeah. She goes, I don't stay in there long, but I just I love being greeted that way. Yeah. And so there's something to that. So they really are, it's less of a place of discovery than Costco, but it's still a place of discovery because you'll find unique deals. But they are, I'm telling you, I just finished the book, Becoming Trader Joe's.
Oh, wow.
And it was fascinating how that company became who they are. And it's even more impressive how they've been able to manage the culture with their founder like long gone.
Yeah.
And so that's another, you're hitting on like these really great brands and how they differentiate themselves. But at the root, I would say, of all of them, and I think this is a great thing for us to think about in terms of like what we're doing, you guys at Dosch Marshall, us at Baker Katz, is just the importance of culture and being good listeners and listening to our customers and what they're saying. And in y'all's case, with people that are either buying or selling land with us, retailers that are expanding, I mean, I could give you many examples, but I think that the common thread in all of this is what you're talking about is culture. And those three companies, at least today, have really strong cultures with things that were put in place years ago that still continue to be a very real part of their business.
So a big thing you guys are doing, you've always done with Baker Katz is your own developments and own investments. Where are you seeing kind of the retail development space right now? I know it's been impacted by rates going up, especially the infill market, because we saw maybe 5 years ago just a ton of new retail in the Heights, some really cool development, infill developments. That's really stalled out, maybe coming back a little bit. But where do you see retail development today as far as where the activity is? And there's also tremendous growth, like we talked about, in the suburbs, these big master plan communities, and a need for retail, great population growth. So it's happening, and it seems like there's been a lot of appetite for retail development. But where do you kind of see that today and go over the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, I think we'll start seeing a meaningful amount of retail coming back online in 26. There are projects that have been talked about and kicked around for the last year, where there's finally some real headway being made. We're seeing a lot of that in West Houston. I mean, we can't overstate what a big deal the evolution and the expansion of the Grand Parkway has been. I mean, for really kind of I'm talking about Houston now, sorry, Tom. But for every category of real estate, I mean, it's certainly launched and kicked off a lot of industrial development, a ton of residential development, which is what you're talking about. But it's also created opportunities for new quality retail development, and we're seeing first and second phases of great developments taking place along the Grand Parkway. It's such a big deal. And by the way, our city doesn't get enough credit for its thoughtfulness around that development. You can find it, I think, online. The city and its leadership were talking about this Grand Parkway, I think, back in the 70s and 80s.
Wow, that's amazing.
So just the fact that they were that, I mean, who can you imagine in the 1980s with a population of, I don't know, 1 million people? I don't know what our population was at that point.
Yeah.
And saying like, we're going to have this 180-mile loop around our city that's going to be the biggest in the world. You'd be like, what are you talking about?
And that was so far out. I mean, that was way beyond the edge of town.
So far out. Yeah, you're right. That was really the country.
Yeah.
And so it's been, that's been cool to see. But I definitely, we're in this funny, and it's a good spot. Our company, we have been opportunistic investors and developers. We have bought and or built close to 100 projects.
Wow.
We actually took down a big regional mall, which is the former Sharpstown Mall. We bought a little over 5 years ago. We own and or manage about 2.5 million feet. And that represents probably 400 or 500 leases, 450 leases maybe. And we're still really bullish on investments like the ones that we've either bought or built. But it's a really funny time. And I think it's created an antsiness in the market where no one's been able to afford to build anything. And no one's really excited about selling anything for the reasons I mentioned earlier, which are that occupancy and rents are as high as they've ever been. Mm-hmm. So then you look at where it cost you to borrow, and you look at where someone might be willing to trade, and they don't line up. And so we have, for the most part in retail, we've been in effectively like a transactionless market. And there's just not been a lot trading hands because the owners don't want to sell, and buyers can't afford it.
And cap rates have gone up, and because of rates.
That's exactly right. So it's a funny time. We're under contract on a deal. We'll close probably in July, and it's a deal we've worked on for a long, long time that we like a lot. But we have been not it's not that we haven't actively been looking, but we have just been less active. And I tell our partners on the deals where we have partners, I tell them, look, we've been disciplined and not sort of buying into the hype or being so antsy to do something that we make a bad decision.
Yeah,
and
such a good point.
I think we're on the front end of seeing a lot of new product coming on the market. I think you'll start seeing that at the end of 26. And I mean, I go to Las Vegas this next weekend for our annual ICSC. And I was looking at the registration list, and registration is high. All of the brands, all of the names, all the developers will have a presence there. And I just get the strong feeling with how quickly people's schedules have filled up that this is a really, really good indicator that that at least in retail, things are really, really stable. So I'm not sure if that answers exactly.
No, it definitely feels that way. I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a step back and talk about when we met, which is over 20 years ago now. I think it was in 2003 that we met. And so you were at a Wolf and Company, and you were on the tenant rep side. And I remember, I don't want to overstate that you're the father of the tenant rep retail brokerage, but I remember you told me a story about being early on. So you started in the mid-90s with Ed Wolf, who was just a legend in the retail business here in Houston, a great guy. And you talked about sitting at a big conference table with the whole company and talking about how I like to focus on the tenant rep side of the business. And people are like, the tenant reps, what are you talking about? Can you talk a little bit about that? And I guess at that point, maybe the focus is more leasing than tenant rep.
Yeah. By the way, to be referred to as the father of anything makes me feel super old. Although I've got 4 daughters and a wife. And so I'm feeling older and older every day. I mean, working for Ed Wolf was outstanding. I graduated from A&M. He was my first job out of college. I can't and couldn't say enough good things about that man and the opportunity that he gave me. And shortly after me, Kenneth, my partner now, we both started at that company. I was introduced to a retailer about a year into the business. I had been working on leasing. I'd been on the leasing side of things within Ed's management company and helping him with some real stressed out projects. And I realized pretty quickly, like, I don't think I want to be doing this. But I was introduced to a retailer that had a massive appetite through the franchise model to expand, and was given an opportunity to work on that, and just absolutely fell in love with the tenant rep side of our business and kind of never looked back. And to your point, Ed, I think wisely, at least for me, Ed each year at the beginning of the year kind of forced us to sit down and talk about the year and how we planned on being productive and profitable and for the company. And I just remember making this kind of declaration that I was just going to focus solely on tenant rep a year into the business, and everybody kind of laughed at me, but it worked out pretty well. And I'm grateful for it. And Kenneth joined the company shortly after that, and we really focused our energy and attention on that. And I would say that those years under Ed's leadership and learning that business really were a catalyst and foundational to us being able to do what we've done up to this point, which has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I remember you started Baker Katz, and so that was really close around the time I met you. I think it was maybe I met you 6 months, a year before that. I remember you had just gotten married.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I remember your wife, Susanna, who's amazing. She was all nervous, like, they're going on their own. Are they going to make it? And I was like, I don't know Jason very well, but I know Jason's going to make it and be successful. I had a lot of confidence in you. And I'd love to talk to you maybe a little bit more about your partnership with Kenneth, because I think we believe so much in partnership and the value of partnership, and not worrying about is everything fair in the moment or what are you doing, what am I doing, but seeing how we complement each other and how there's strengths and weaknesses, and embracing each other's strengths, and learning to work through each other's weaknesses and finding the pieces of the puzzle that can kind of help be a whole team. And you guys have just done so well. And I think about, going 20 years. And I think the stats on like a new company, I think it's like 97% fail in the first 10 years. And even in our business, we've seen over the decades, these groups kind of rise up and compete with us pretty significantly for a period of time, and then they're just gone. And then there's another group, it's just like, it's so hard. Even groups who are successful, it's so hard to just stay in it and to be successful and to be relevant and to be a leader in the business. And you guys have done that so well. So maybe just, if you don't mind talking a little bit more about the partnership and just how that's been seems like from the outside looking in, just a real strength for the company, for you guys.
There's no way I could say enough good things about Kenneth Katz. We worked together. We started just shortly. He started shortly after me at Wolf and Company, and we both had worked for Ed. Those were, as I mentioned, that was about 9 years, and that was a ton of fun. We just celebrated 20 years in December, and boy, I have learned so much. I don't think I've learned, or maybe back up and let me say it differently. I have learned more about life and business from through Kenneth Katz more than anybody in my life. I would say, if you said whittle it down to just a couple of things, I would say number one, he's taught me more about empathy than anybody in my life, period.
Mm-hmm.
Hard stop. And then he's taught me more about, I would say too, probably more about just like lifting your head above the clouds and kind of like not getting caught up in the
emotional,
like just being level. And a lot of that comes through just like pausing and gaining understanding. I think I'm not wired that way naturally, and I think he is, and I think that's been amazing. It's a great thing, and I'm so thankful. I can undoubtedly say I would rather not be in this business than to not be in this business with him.
That's awesome.
I would. It's been incredible. So I'm just so grateful. But yeah, we were at Wolf for 9 years. We started this company. It was Kenneth and Tracy Holman and a couple of other people, and we were small, and we've grown slowly, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been great. I've loved this industry. And
one thing I'd say about Kenneth that comes to mind is he's probably the nicest person I've ever met. and a lot of times when you meet people that are really nice, it's not real, and it's fake or it comes off cheesy. But like you say about empathy, Kenneth actually really cares about you. Like when you first meet him. Yeah. And it's almost a little bit disarming because it's so genuine and it's so intense, and he's so focused on you and what you think, and so humble also. I mean, listening to like, what do you think about this, and wanting to learn. And so, it's amazing. I love hearing that. And I love hearing that, you think about how sometimes people are married for a long time and, things aren't the same as they were when they started, and people aren't maybe as happy with each other or whatever. And the same thing can be said for partnerships. You hear some pretty bad stories about, it'd be interesting to look at how many partnerships don't end well. That happens all the time. So to hear that, 20 years in, you guys are still really strong, and there's such a great friendship and relationship, and it really makes sense why you've been so successful when you have that foundation, And it's cool because you couldn't be more different. You both bring really strong skill sets that complement each other really well. If you're both the same, you wouldn't have had the success I think that you've had.
I think that's right. That's right. Yeah. He's a remarkable person. That's for sure.
I remember, Jason, when we were talking about starting Dosch Marshall, we went and had breakfast with you at Fountain View Cafe. And I think this was around the time of just the sale, the Newmark, or the ARA sale to Newmark. And we were looking to you to give us advice. So maybe speak a little bit to you and Kenneth working together so long at Wolf and then deciding to go out on your own. And what was like the purpose and the driving force behind saying, it's been incredible here, but we want to go build our own company, Baker Katz.
Yeah, I think that there was I think that there were several factors. I mean, one was Ed had really shifted most of his attention to development. I mean, Ed had a hand in some really meaningful projects in our city, from Meyerland Plaza to the Saks Pavilion acquisition, which became Boulevard Place, to Gulf Gate, to Shepherd Square. He had a hand on so many meaningful projects, and he was the right guy for the moment. But the tension and the resources of the company were shifted more that direction. And Kenneth and I were new enough in our careers that we wanted to stay focused on tenant representation. That's number one. And then I would say, sort of coupled with that, was this idea of having this, having an itch you can't scratch. Like, we knew that we had that that was deep inside of us. We knew that we wanted to do that. I think that was the expectation that we sort of unwittingly had, and we just knew that it was something we wanted to do. So no matter what Ed had done or was willing to do, we knew that at some point we wanted to do our own thing. And we had developed ideas after 9 years of being there of things that we would want to do very similarly to Ed, and then things we wanted to do very different. And I remember our first conversation with Ed, we went to him. What had been modeled for us, not just at Wolf, but at other companies, was that people didn't give much in the ways of notice, and there were abrupt changes, and it rarely ended well relationally with people. So we got way ahead of that with Ed. We told him 6 months before we left privately that what we wanted to do. And then we asked him, we invited him into the process. I remember the first person we ever showed our logo to was him, and wanted his feedback on that. And then there was the idea of how to split up business, some of the business that he'd helped us generate. And to us, it was always, and by the way, this had been modeled for Kenneth and me by our parents, right?
Yeah.
This was so to us, it was, Ed's offered us an opportunity. He's become like an uncle or a family member to us. We love him dearly, and we want to do this in the way that most honors him. And I feel really good about the way that we left, and we continue to have great relationship with Ed. He passed away a couple of years ago. Kenneth and I had a meal with him 3 weeks before he passed away. And I just remember leaving that meal and saying, I don't know how much longer he has, but I'm just forever grateful for this relationship. And he and his widow and I continue to talk, and they're just deeply meaningful people to me. So, but that's what we did. And, but hey, listen, there are times when I look back and go, life sure was a lot simpler, life sure was a lot simpler back then. And it certainly was, but man, it's been fun doing your own thing.
I love hearing that story, and I appreciate you sharing the way you left, because I think it's so rare in our business. I mean, most of the time we see people just leave and try and maybe take things and do it in a very unhealthy way, and not value the relationship and care about that. And we had a similar situation when we left ARA Newmark. We had been blessed so much by those guys, David Alfke and Matt Rotan and Dave Wiley, just incredible guys. And so we went to them 6 months early and said, hey, we just really think this is the direction we need to go. And at that point, in a similar fashion, they were we could tell on the way out, of brokerage. And we're like, the reason we're here is because of you guys. So if you guys aren't going to be here, we don't want to be stuck at this big, multinational, real estate company where there's no relationships. But I think, having a real honest conversation, here's the deals, here's the relationships, how do you want us to work them, just offering that up. And we were able to leave in a really good way. And it was funny because Newmark sort of had this thing of like being a good leaver or a bad leaver.
Yeah.
And so we got termed a good leaver, even though they actually were way more generous with us and gave us a lot more than they were supposed to. But it's because the way we handled it. And, I think and this is just a big point about our business, being long-term on relationships is so critical. I mean, it's amazing looking back on people we've met 15 or 20 years ago and had relationships with, and in some cases maybe had some grace on because things didn't go that great at some point, but you give people a chance later on, and it's amazing how people keep cycling back in our business. And so the importance of not burning a bridge and just treating people the way you'd want to be treated. And it's sad that it's actually very rare in our business. Our business is so much about kind of entitlement and I just got to go get everything for me, and this almost like a fear-based competition. When you can kind of be more open-handed, I think there's a big blessing in that. So that's awesome to hear that.
Yeah, that's great.
And then for you guys, it was tenant rep, retail, but also on the broker side, but also development immediately. You guys, I remember you guys encouraged me so much in this is, hey, start investing as soon as you can. So I remember in my 20s, starting to invest, every chance I got in deals, started as a really small amount and then grew over the years. And now we actually have a investment company that we run called Ascent. But you were really instrumental in Tom and I thinking that way, and so maybe talk a little bit about that, being very dialed in on the tenant rep side, which gave you such a great perspective on where these retailers want to be, what kind of developments make sense. You even had clients like Starbucks say, hey, there's no building in this location. Can you build us, do a build to it for us in this location, and we'll lease from you. Maybe just talk a little bit about that and how you've grown that. And then 100 projects is amazing. I mean, that's an incredible milestone to get to that point.
Yeah,
So,
to Ed, going back to Ed Wolf, I mean, to his great credit, very early on, Kenneth, I went to work for him. He was in his mid 60s. And Ed told me, I bet 6 months into the business, Ed mentioned, at least put some money to work through a deal as soon as you can. And if all you did was one deal a year, he said, by the time you're my age, which would have been 40 years later, more than 40 years later, he said, you'll have done really well. And so I would say, I mean, my dad had been a developer. Kenneth's father had been a real estate attorney, but also an investor in deals. And I think that felt like the natural progression for us. Kenneth probably enjoyed the tenant rep work less than I did.
yeah.
But he loved it. He did loved and was very good at the execution of the business. He didn't love the idea of maybe going out and getting the business as much, but Kenneth is, more than anybody I know, like a constant learner.
Yeah.
Like he is he is just a lifetime learner and is curious about so many things, which is, I think, part of what's made him such an amazing listener. And he's the best listener I know. And he I would say, maybe a handful of years into starting our own company, we came up with the idea that he would focus more attention and learn more about the development, the development side of the business. And so that's what we did. Up until that point, we had just invested as GP or LPs in deals. We had found deals, we'd taken them to people, and we'd participated that way. But we knew that in doing it that way, we were not learning all we needed to do.
Yeah.
I mean, all we needed to learn, and that we were giving up a lot. And so it's been fun. I mean, someone asked me yesterday, like, what's y'all's program when it comes to development? And I just don't think we can help ourselves. We're opportunistic.
Yeah.
And it's been everything from buying empty buildings to, like I mentioned, buying an old regional mall that just needed some TLC and some attention, which it hadn't received. And we built one of the largest, I'm going to call it a power center, if it would even be termed that, but a big regional center up in Brenham that might have been the only one of its kind in the whole state when we did it. And we definitely have enjoyed that side of the business. And we're set up now to do more of that, and are hopeful that the coming months and years create even more of those opportunities.
Yeah, you've had such a unique kind of strategy and perspective with that, because so many groups go out and raise a fund or try and get a lot of investors and just really grow it. Go buy a lot of deals. I remember talking to Kenneth. This is going back like maybe it was 13 years ago or so, because we had a high net worth, really good friend, and I said, man, if you want to invest in a company, this is the group to invest with. So I called Kenneth and I was like, you share kind of our expectations and multiple. And Kenneth was like, we don't really think about it that way. He's like, we look at really good deals. We're not trying to go raise a lot of investors. We have a couple of really good investors and we're well capitalized, and we're just going to go do the really good deals. And it's hard for me to tell you how long we're going to hold them or what the IRR is going to be, or we believe there'll be good deals, but we're not thinking like a traditional investment company that's trying to go out and really promote and really raise a lot of money and then have to be accountable to these certain metrics of when we sell or that kind of thing. So I think you've had a unique strategy with that's been very successful.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think a lot of that comes from having represented retailers for so long and retailers in so many different categories that at least for a while, I don't think this is any longer the case, but I know for a while our thought was, if we don't have a single retailer that would consider coming to this project, we probably shouldn't invest in it.
Yeah.
And I think we've moved away from that a little bit, but I do think, and Kenneth's taught me a lot about this as well, is I think the discipline to think about consistently measuring your downside instead of just focusing on the upside.
Yeah.
And measuring it that way, I think has served us really well. And we've not lost any projects. We've always been able to get our partners those deals where we have partners, get our partners their money back, plus some, in many cases, a lot more. And it's been, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's been being careful what you listen to, being disciplined, reminding yourself like it's the marathon, not the not the speeding, the 100-yard dash. And so yeah, we've definitely have approached investing a little bit differently than most of our peers.
And I think what's so incredible for you guys is because you're so strong on the tenant rep side and understand what the tenants want, it gives you a different perspective. There's so many retail groups, and some of these big funds and stuff, they're relying on brokers to bring them deals, but they don't really see it and understand, like, how does a tenant think? Yeah. What do they really want? And that's helped us with Ascent. We do so much buyer rep brokerage. We're representing all these different developers across the state. We know what they want, what they don't want, and we know as it's changing, and then who may or may not be interested. And so seeing it really from that standpoint, has helped us avoid a lot of mistakes. And I think that's such a good point about watching the downside, because I think especially as brokers, and I think you're probably more on the glass, half full versus glass half empty, and Kenneth maybe more the glass half empty. That's a really good combination, because I think as a broker, you can be like, man, this is a good deal. This is going to be amazing. And then having someone who can kind of counter that and say, yeah, there's a lot of good reasons why it could be a good deal, but what about all the ways it could go wrong? Because when you go through enough cycles, you see deals go wrong in a lot of different ways.
Oh, for sure. And thankfully, Kenneth and I were laughing about this last night, or late yesterday afternoon, is we were both laughing about the fact that we both had fathers that forced us to have thick skin. Yeah. And so you're exactly right. I think kind of going back to culture, and one of the things we were talking about earlier is making sure that you have people in your life that can tell you really hard things. Yeah. Kenneth and I were looking at a deal in South Texas just in the last couple of weeks. And I did some back of the napkin underwriting on the deal. He did it separately for me. We came together and our numbers could not have been more different. Yeah. And I realized pretty quickly that his were probably a lot better basis for which we should submit an offer on a deal than mine. And I kind of felt like a buffoon. But it's good that you can laugh that stuff off, and you can lean into the other people's strengths. And I think he was thinking about it very differently than I was. And I'm grateful for that.
All right. Well, that was incredible just to get that update from Jason, to get to hear from someone that's so engaged as a leader in the retail business across the state. And so we're going to stop it there for today, because that was a lot of really good content. We did record this, like we said at the beginning, in 2 parts. And so this next week we'll be releasing part 2, which is really going to really delve more into just Jason as a leader, both in his business, kind of what he learned from his father growing up, but also just how he leads his family, how he's able to accomplish so much in his life. And we talk about priorities, we talk about margin, talk about just really thinking about himself as beyond just his identity in his career and his business. And so we're going to play a clip here that just covers that really briefly, what to expect this next week. And I think you're really going to enjoy it.
And then I would say lastly, because this could be a lot longer conversation, we could unpack things. I would say I've got 4 daughters. They're 18, 16, 14, and 11. Our youngest daughter, we adopted from China. If you want to expand the worldview of your children, bring an adoptive child into your home. I mean, that's just been an incredible thing. I just remember bringing her back into our home. And it was around that same time that I just feel like I kind of hit bottom. I hit a really rough patch. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I had unknowingly allowed more of my identity to be rooted in who I was professionally than who I was in Christ. And it was eating at me, and it was weighing on me. And that honestly began for me an incredible 10-year journey into really understanding God's purpose for our work, like his design for our work, the potential dangers of work, and then developing and putting together a new purpose for my work.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you have questions about land you own in Texas, send us an email at texaslandguys@dmre.com and follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated.